Stanford University.
All right, why don't we get started? All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Marmon. I was invited here today to talk about the iPhone user interface guidelines. I'm going to talk about that, but in a broader context, in sort of the larger process of how you actually make an iPhone application that doesn't suck. So, and in 10 easy steps, so it's nice and straightforward. So just a little bit about myself before I start out. I grew up in a remote corner of Alaska, did my undergraduate work in the University of Montana, and now I'm here with the Stanford HCI group getting my master's degree. And I also work at the design school as well. And so if you want a little bit more information about me, you can check out my website, although it's horribly out of date. So you better to check on Twitter if you want to see what I'm actually up to. But that's kind of enough about me, and kind of back to the actual topic at hand. So like I said, I was originally asked to talk about the HIG. And the HIG is a wonderful document, and all of you should read it. But the problem with the HIG is it generally kind of focuses on, here's this control, here's where it should go on the screen, here is how many pixels it should be from another control. And it's very, very low level, and it's very useful when you're developing an application to reference the HIG. However, if you're just kind of starting out and you kind of want to know more in general, how should I just build, what app should I build, how should I build it, what is the process, it's kind of a little bit too narrow and specific. So I kind of want to talk about sort of this broader process. And it's going to be kind of informed by sort of the design process that I have learned both in sort of through my HCI curriculum, as well as working at Apple, and then this last summer doing iPhone development, as well as working at the design school, which is affiliated with a product design firm called IDEO. So a lot of this is very kind of D-School/IDEO-ish, and also with a lot of kind of tips and tricks pulled in from what I learned at Apple. So that's kind of a little background of where this process kind of comes from. And so I'm sure all of you know there are great apps on the App Store. Like last week, we heard from Lauren, who came to talk about Tweety. And Tweety is one of these examples of these apps that came on the store. It doesn't really have a ton more features that other Twitter apps didn't have on the store, but it completely dominated and is now the best-selling Twitter app on the store, even though it actually costs money, while the majority of the rest of them are free. And then there are other apps which kind of exist in spaces where there isn't even a lot of competition, and yet they still sell horribly and have not made a lot of inroads. And so the difference here, is of course the user interface to a huge degree. And so how is it that you get to the one on the left rather than the one on the right? And so that's kind of what I'm going through today. So the first step of this process. Oh, and also, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. If you have questions or you want to interject, just put your hand up. It's not. We can stop, or there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So feel free to interject if you'd like. But the first step is first kind of deciding, well, what do you build? And this might seem kind of silly, oh, I have my idea. But a big problem is that a lot of people start with a solution. They might think, oh, well, I want to build a location-aware social network on the iPhone. And it may seem like a great idea, but it may not be clear why are you building this social network for? What is the solution that it's solving? Is it because you notice that your friends have a hard time coordinating for places to eat, to get dinner or something? And if that's the case, that's the need that you saw, then maybe there's a better solution than just kind of this more generic idea that you have. And so what you need to think about when you're starting out the process is, first of all, who is the user that you're actually trying to build this software for? And oftentimes it's too easy to kind of just think, oh, I'm building it for everybody. But it's impossible to build software for everybody. So you have to pick a particular person, a particular very, very narrow user group of who you're actually going to build your software for. And then also, what is the problem that you're trying to solve with it? And it seems obvious, but this is where you need to start before you jump off to the solutions. And if you want to have for sure have a successful app, the best way to go is you say user equals you, problem equals your problem. And this is the guaranteed path to success, because if you are the user that you're building this app for, then you know what your needs are. You know what features you want. You know what you're going to use or you're not going to use. And you can have this sort of immediate feedback loop as you're developing it. And you probably even use the app while you develop it. And this is, for example, what Lauren did with Tweety. He built Tweety for himself. He didn't build it for everybody. He built it for himself. And this is hugely important, because it's extremely hard to imagine what other people might want, like much harder than you realize. And this is why like 80% of software projects fail, is because the developers don't really understand what the users actually want until it's all done. They put it in front of them, and it's like, oh, well, I didn't really need this. I needed this. And so if you can develop for yourself, that's the best way to go. However, if you might have a user, some other user group that you know of that has a need, and you really want to fill that need. Like maybe you want to build an app for grandmothers, and there probably aren't a lot of grandmothers writing iPhone apps. I'm sure there are some, but maybe there's this need, and so if you want to build for them, it's really important to go out and talk to those people, to go out and it's one thing to imagine what they want, another thing to actually go out to them and actually meet them. And what you really want to do is you want to create something like this. Like you want to create a persona of who is this user that you're building this app for. If it's not yourself, who are they? And it can be it doesn't have to be a real person. It can just be this stereotypical made-up person. This kind of a sort of a culmination of people that you've met or people that you know and what they're like. And then you should make this up and say, like, say you're building it for grandmothers, and you're making it for, Jane is a grandmother. She lives in Michigan. She has 3 grandkids in California. And she loves to draw pictures with them. It's her favorite thing to do when they come to visit. And so, but now she's far away, and so she wants to have this interaction. She misses them, so she wants this interaction far away. So if you make this and you staple this above your computer, every point along the process, you can think, well, should I add a feature for sharing this on Facebook? And you might think, well, Jane doesn't actually have Facebook. Maybe this isn't such an important feature for this application. And so it really helps to kind of narrow things down as you're developing. So I'm going to have sort of these principles that I'm kind of espouse at every step along the way. And so the first principle for this first initial step is know your users, and if possible, make the user yourself. So once you have an idea for your app, and this is kind of, I guess, you're sort of at this phase right now. You're going to be moving into building your 3-week project soon. Yeah. So you're kind of here, and soon you're going to be moving beyond that phase. And so the first thing you might want to do is, well, now I know my user is, and the problem is, now I'm going to start coding the solution. And that's not what you want to do. It's much too easy to jump the gun and start developing before you actually really have a solid idea of how to go about doing this. And so the first thing I recommend that you do is visit the App Store. Because one thing, it's surprising how often people write apps that have already been written and been written really well. So there's that. But in addition to that, there's a lot of, on the iPhone, you don't have the opportunity to really teach the user very much, new interactions or new designs or new ways to use programs, because people have very limited attention spans. People have very limited patience for your application. Most applications, far and away, are never used more than once. So if you're actually going to try and make an app, if you want an app that people can immediately learn how to use, you want it to be similar to what they already have used. So you want to for one thing, you want to look on the App Store and see what the popular apps are on the store, and see how they work. And you want to look at the Apple apps as well that are on your phone already, because it's really easy to just think, oh, I know how iPhone apps work. But then when you sit down to do it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, when is this control actually really used? And is it really OK if I have 16 levels of view controller tables? And so looking at what other apps do will help you a lot about what people are doing and what people expect from applications. And in addition, you also this helps mitigate the risk that you might reinvent the wheel in terms of certain aspects of your application. For example, say you wanted to go and have a graph in your application that charts some metric over time. There aren't any Apple apps, except for the stocks, that has that. But even the stocks isn't really an interactive version of that control. So you may not really. So you might think, well, you could sit down and actually sketch out and think about it really hard. And how should it work? And how should panning work? And do you zoom on these things? And you might think there's a lot of things to think about. But the fact is that graphing is a kind of a it's not completely specific to your problem. And there's probably other apps on the store that do this as well. So what you want to do is you want to go out and look at other apps and find what other people have done, and and see, and they've probably gone through all this process of figuring out how it should work, and they've put it in front of users, and they've iterated, and they've gotten feedback from users and what they did wrong, and they've fixed it. And so there's a lot of knowledge out there just free for the taking that you can get. And so it comes down to this axiom. You probably, oh sure, yeah. So the question was, what about being sort of psyched out by other apps being on the market? And you shouldn't take this as if there's already an app out there, you shouldn't go forward. I mean, if there's apps out there and you are not satisfied with them, then there's something that's missing. And there are other people probably like you that also are missing those same features from those applications, or they don't like the way the application works in the same way that you do. So you shouldn't be completely turned off by that. But there are a lot of times there's cases where you just hadn't really looked hard enough, and there actually is a great app that you might actually like. So there's definitely there's some apps for which it's easy. There's switching costs. So with Twitter, it has a very low switching cost. You can just type in your username and password to another app, and it's really easy to switch. There are other apps, like maybe your weight tracking application, where they've already entered their weight every single day for the last 200 days. And so, those apps are going to be a little bit harder to kind of break into the market with, because people are already established, with existing apps. But even so, the App Store is growing, and it's still at a phenomenal rate. And app sales aren't slowing down. So there's all kinds of new users pouring in that are going to be looking at your app for the first time. And so if there's something special and unique that's different than your app than what's already there, you still have a good chance of coming in even later in the game. So you shouldn't be completely, totally psyched out by those people.
So you're the 200th Twitter app, and you show the most popular ones first.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's not necessarily going to be easy. So even Tweety, it took reviews by relatively important people on the internet to go and encourage, help other people find it. So so if you can find a unique niche, then you're more likely to to have a success. It's not. I'm not saying it's not going to be any less hard, but you're going to have to rely on more than just the what's released this week list to be successful. Yeah, question back there? Or no? Oh, sorry. Michael, any more questions? All right, cool. So continuing. So yeah. So there's this wonderful quote: "Good artists copy, great artists steal." It doesn't mean that you should steal other apps' designs or ideas identically, but you should kind of build on the shoulders of others, and not where other actions have been sort of established on the store, and other apps have done them. Make sure you follow those conventions so users are familiar with them. So yeah, don't build your app in a bubble. Look around before you actually move forward. So the third step is now you want to sort of explore the space of solutions for your application. And so you might think, oh, well, I could just jump in at your first solution. You'll really want to just do that. You think it's really great. And I always think my first solution is really great. And I love it, and I don't want to depart from it. But it's never the best. Even the best designers I knew at Apple, their first designs were always awful in comparison with what they came up eventually. You'll get better with your first design the more projects you develop. But especially when you're in a new domain like iPhone versus a desktop, it's much harder to kind of get in the mindset of how do you develop for this new platform. So it's really important to explore a lot of different solutions. And as you do this, you want to have a few constraints in mind. Of course, the iPhone has a small screen. So you want to think of what is iPhone-sized data? What data you might use on the desktop, you're going to have to sacrifice some of it probably to really make it available on the phone. So you think, what is it that people are actually going to need on a small screen? What are they going to need on the go? And what can you throw away? In addition, the iPhone has much less precise input than you're going to have on the desktop or a lot of other mobile platforms. So you have a finger, and it's a much more blunt, it's more blunt at acquiring targets. So they need to be about 44 pixels big to actually hit a target on the phone, and that's much larger than buttons that you're used to making. So you want to keep this in mind. People tend not to like to type on the iPhone. I'll say that it's worse than other mobile devices, but it's still kind of a pain to actually type on this little small cramped keyboard. And so as a result, you want to orient your application. Most applications, as a result of this, are oriented towards consumption rather than production. So you read things versus writing them. And so it's not to say that apps aren't successful at writing. There's Birdhouse. There's this wonderful Twitter app that's very successful, relatively successful considering how niche it is. But it's only for writing tweets. You can't even read them. And so there's clearly a use out there for production applications, but generally that tends to be a lot less of the case. And finally, people tend to use iPhone apps in very short bursts. So the average iPhone app is used for less than 5 minutes at a time. Most of those are still used less than 1 minute at a time. And so these very, very short interactions. So trying to keep that in mind, you don't want to build a process that takes a person a really long time to go through. They may lose interest and leave your application, or just not even lose interest. They might be on the subway and have to get off it's their stop, so they don't have time. So you need to keep these in mind. However, there's also affordances as well that the iPhone affords that you don't really get on other platforms, or that you may not be used to developing for. You use multi-touch, accelerometers, and GPS. You're all familiar with. It's important to keep in mind that users often aren't as familiar with these. They aren't as accustomed to using accelerometers as input, and so this requires a little bit more. It requires a little bit more training on that part. But there are really, aside from all of these, the most important thing to keep in mind is that you're building this for a particular user. And so as you're exploring this space, keep in mind all the time who that user is that you're building this for. So you don't kind of wander off too far with like weird features that are not really related to what you're going to be building. And ultimately, as you're doing this, you want this should be your goal, right? Your goal is not to stuff as many features in as you can possibly fit. Your goal is actually as few as you can that still achieves what you want to accomplish. And so, like that app we showed at the very beginning that had like 72 buttons on one screen, clearly they could have done with some fewer there, and they might have been a little bit more successful. And an example of this is iPhoto. So iPhone on the desktop is this, full-featured application. It has faces and places, and you can edit, and does all this stuff, and it's great. And you look on the iPhone, and you can look at pictures, and you can delete pictures. And it doesn't mean it's successful. Like, it's very successful of an application. Anyone can use it. Like, little 3-year-old kids can figure out how to use this application. It's so minimal because there's not like 400 buttons cluttering the screen that they could hit by accident or have to parse out. And so, really, like finding this minimal set of features it's not so minimal that you're like people stop using the app because it's missing the features they need. But that balance, it's a hard balance to strike. And how you get there is through a lot of brainstorming. So then the principle here is to be minimal in this exploration phase. Once you're done with that, you need to get your ideas down on paper. And so you need a sketch. And so before you can get like to this app on the, I guess that's your right, you need to start out with this sketch on the left. Yep. Sure. Yeah. So the question was, when being minimal, how do you, it's hard because you can think of new features. Yeah, and how do you narrow down? How do you narrow down to this minimal number of features? And so one thing that helps when doing this is if you have a very specific user, you can figure out what are the minimal features that this user needs. Like you can imagine other users might want other features, but if you can think like if you can keep narrowing down your user group that you're targeting to this very specific user, you can it's better to build a great app for a tiny number of users than to build an app that's kind of sort of half OK for a lot of people. And then like no one really wants to use it because it's not that great. But you can get a small user group that likes it a lot. You can always expand from there once you get feedback. And so it's narrowing in on a particular user group is really useful in that process. And also, as will coming up in soon, like actually putting your sketches and designs in front of users will help you figure out which ones people sort of miss and which ones they really they look for and they cannot find because they really need them. And so a lot of this is going to be sort of via feedback loops as well. So, in terms of sketching, once you're sketching here, you might once again be tempted to sketch one design and be happy with it. If you've gone through all of brainstorming, you have an idea of your features. You probably have some idea in your head how it will look like, and so you want to create your design. So you sketch out your feature, you sketch out your design. It's great and it's wonderful, and you're happy. But the fact is that it's almost certainly not the best way of designing your application. And also, it may have this aspect of it may have features that users don't need or ones that are missing, and it's hard to know. So what you really want to do is sketch a few more. Like if you have 3 versions, and they have slightly different features and slightly different layouts of things, then you've explored a little more of the space. If you do a few more, you've gotten even more. And then if you do like 10 of them, you've probably gotten a lot of the feature space right there. And in fact, this is a technique used at Apple, is this sort of create 10 alternative designs at the beginning. And the idea is that creating one design is easy. Creating 3 designs is also pretty easy. 5 gets kind of harder. and like 7 is getting really hard. And then those last 3 are like impossible to think of new ideas. Like you're trying to like think of any ways you can vary this interface, and you're like running out of ideas. But it's these last 3 that are really valuable, like where the really like creative sort of sparks come from. And you can try these crazy ideas, and maybe they may not work, maybe they do. But there may be some portion of them that you can retain as part of the final design. And so by pushing yourself to think a lot of ideas at the beginning, you can and then showing these to users, you can help figure out. Yeah, question? So the question is there a good tool for laying things out? And I'll talking about tools very soon, so I'll come to your question. So what you want to do here is you want to like leverage other people to help figure out which of your sketches, which of your sort of ideas that are sketched out are the best. And ideally, you want to go to your actual, like, if there's a user group other than yourself and your friends, you want to go to them. If you can't, even going to your friends is still going to be really, really useful. And so what you can do then is you can begin to narrow things down. You can show it to people. They can be like, oh, I can't comprehend what's going on here, and I love this over here. You'll get so much feedback, more feedback than you know what to do with, just by showing a few ideas to people. And you can narrow it down, and you'll probably end up with a few designs, usually, that you really can't. They're all kind of the same. People disagree which they like better. It's really not clear which is the best. So you'll have a few kind of ideas for what the app should look like. And this is good. So now you actually come a long way from just one design. And so the principle here is quality through quantity. And it's kind of like, have you guys heard there's like this story of like the clay pots experiment? Have you guys heard this? No? So the clay pot, they did this experiment. I think it was actually here at Stanford, but maybe somewhere else. And the idea was that they took a class, and they had half the class that was a pottery class, and half the class was told that they would be graded on in the end, they could turn in one pot, and it would be, and like however good their pot was is how they'd be graded. And they could create how many pots they want in the meantime, but they really need to turn in one best pot. And that's what their grade would depend on. And the other half of the class was told, we're going to take all your pots and throw them on a big scale, and we're going to weigh them. And however heavy it is, that's how much your grade is. And then at the end of the class, everyone, so this one class just created like a ridiculous number of pots, and the class just created a few really, they had a lot of time refining. And in the end, they had independent judges come in, and as you probably guessed from this other study, the side of the class that actually just was rated on quantity actually had much nicer pots than the one that was graded on quality, because they'd done so many pots. They learned how to make pots. They experimented with different techniques, and they learned how to make a good pot. And so this is very much the same exact principle applies here. It may seem counterintuitive, but just by creating a lot of designs, you'll actually get to the better design much faster. So once you've kind of done that, then you want to go on and like, well, now how do you evaluate this design? So once again, you might want to just code this. It's hard to like hold back and turn to coding, but this process doesn't really take that much time. You can do this in a few days, and it'll actually be like there's this wonderful chart which I couldn't find in time for the presentation, which showed like the cost of making changes in your design at each point in this phase, and that doubles at every phase. So like it's twice as expensive to redesign a paper prototype than it is a sketch, and twice as expensive to do these to actually redo code than a paper prototype. And so the more you spend time you spend down here fixing things, the much less time you'll spend actually down the road doing it, and you actually save yourself a lot of time in the end. But back on to sort of what a paper prototype actually is. And so this is it. It's just like a piece of paper, and usually there's like one piece of paper for each of your screens, exactly drawn, exactly how the screen will be. Like your sketch might be kind of messy and much on one piece of paper, and they're not like really, it's kind of a haphazard collection of ideas. This is actually your application, but on paper. And the value you get here is that if you actually draw your application on paper and you do one page per screen, you can actually have users use your application before you've put 100 hours into encoding it. You can actually put someone down, and they can like say, OK, here you are. You've just opened my new Twitter app. Why don't you check your tweets? Or here, why don't you write a new tweet? And then they have to like tap where they think would happen, and then you swap out the screens to what actually would happen, and then they tap again. And it's really simple, and it's pretty quick to do these. And you can do three of them, like a few of them, like 3 of them, without a lot of time investment. Ask people to use them, and you'll find people will get stuck, and people will be confused, and people will like things and not like other things. And you get much richer feedback here yet than you just get by showing them sketches. Because they might say that sketch looks pretty. When they try and use it, then they might be still like they get stumped at certain points. And you can do really cool stuff. Like this is one actually created. I don't know if you can see it that well. This is actually an iPhone. It's a really enormous iPhone. Someone in this class created this prototype a couple of quarters ago. And it was really used. They were building a game on the iPhone. And they wanted to understand, they didn't really have a good idea how to make this game work right. And so they didn't really sure like how you should move pieces on the board, and they had all different ideas. And so they built this prototype. And on the back side, this is a piece of paper that's kind of like, they could slide it forward and back to pan the map. So as the game plays, the map kind of panned. And these little dots on there are little pieces, there's little metal dots, and they had a magnet underneath. And so those little dots were the locations on the map. And so they moved the magnet underneath to show that how people were moving around on top. And it was these wonderful little things. And it didn't take them very long to put this thing together. But then they were able to play the game. And it's a huge win to be able to play the game before you've written any lines of code. And they learned a huge amount from it. And it turned out to be a great project in the end. So there's that. And then the final really useful thing you can do at the paper prototyping stage is you can kind of test these really tricky interactions that you kind of not really sure about. So one thing on the iPhone is there's a lot of sort of implicit interactions you can do. You can shake the device. You can rotate the device. And there's all these things that that aren't really obvious. And determining if users actually will do those is actually really important because it can make a big difference for your application. And so there's a few different types of implicit interactions. And trying to figure out how you should integrate them is tricky. So you can try, for example, there's this application called WaitBot, and they learned from their testing that they had to show little prompts and explanations of how to use this app because it wasn't as explicitly clear to the user. Tweety, for example, Tweety has these implicit interactions, but they rely on kind of sort of discovery of it. It's happened to actually discover that they can do these kind of they can swipe across and find something. It's not clear they can. There's no obvious thing that tells people they can do that, but people can discover that they can swipe. And so these things are these are some of these really tricky issues with iPhone programming. How do you know if you're doing that or not? And paper prototyping can help you figure some of these things out. So the principle here is fail early to succeed sooner. So through all these early phases, your idea is you're going to fail at some point along. Something's going to be not quite right. So you want to fail now rather than try to have to rewrite a bunch of code later on. So now on to your question earlier about tools. So fire up tool. So this is the tool which I recommend. You can use Photoshop and there's other applications, but my personal favorite is Omnigraffle. And it's really wonderful because it's kind of a vector. It's supposed to be a graphing tool for flowcharts and things, but it's kind of morphed into this prototyping tool. And because there's all these wonderful libraries of stencils that you can get, and this is a one stencil set for doing iPhone development.
Could you put the name of it?
It's called Omnigraffle.
So is that like a Mac software? I've never heard of that.
Yeah, the question is, is this a Mac software? And yes, this is a Mac-only software for doing graphing. So it's really excellent. It's one of my it's one of my most favorite apps of all time. It never leaves my dock.
It's like Photoshop or something, but with templates. Or...
Yeah. So the question is it like Photoshop? Photoshop is a sort of pixel-based system. So you manipulate the pixel level. This is more like you manipulate sort of these stencils and lines and boxes, and so it's more vector-oriented, which is really useful at this level when where you can just kind of you don't maybe not completely. The gradients don't need to be flawlessly identical to what the final version will be, but all the elements can be on screen. And there's a question?
Are the iPhone stencils add-ons, or is it come with the standard package?
The question was the iPhone stencils add-ons. Yes, they are. There's a website called Graphletopia, just like that, or just Graphel then Topia, or you just search for Omnigraffle stencils online, and you'll find that this one website. There's one main website which has just tons of them, and there's actually 3 different sets last time I checked of iPhone stencils. This one here was created by Yahoo, I believe. I don't know if Yahoo even has applications on the store, but for whatever reason they created this set. But it's extremely useful. So you can very quickly drag and drop stuff. And it's actually, it's nicer than doing an interface builder, because interface builder, you kind of get sort of the default states of controls and things. But here you can get all these wonderful different, this one doesn't show it as much, but there's other ones, the switches on and off, things like that. It's really, instead of having to set that stuff in code or fiddle with all the properties in interface builder, you can just drag and drop most of the states you can actually see in a final application. As well as you can integrate custom elements here too. So I often use this with a tiny bit of Photoshop mixed in for the things that don't actually exist in this toolkit. Whereas that's more of a pain to do directly in Interface Builder, for example. And you can share this with people who don't have Xcode. So other people, they're designers, other people that you're working with. So here's some. These are a couple of screens I created using Omnigraffle. And they look almost identical to the final versions in the shipping application for one that I happen to be working on. And so you can do like, and you can actually get like almost pixel perfect identical to what the final version will look like, which is phenomenal, which is really useful at this stage, because after you've paper prototyped, you've gotten your feedback, you've kind of like got that down at that level. Now you want to know like, will everything that on my paper prototype actually fit on the screen? Like paper prototypes, there might not be quite enough room for that button that you thought there was any room for, or there may be issues of like color issues that maybe didn't exist. Although it's still one advantage of doing paper first is it's better to design in black and white before color, so that colorblind users don't have issues with your software. So so if it works in paper, it should also work here as well. But you can experiment with adding color to your application at this point as well. And also, if you're working with multiple people, this makes it really easy to if you create a pixel perfect version of your application before you actually code it, then you can share that file with everyone, and then you can all work. And it's the communication overhead, just the cost savings for that is phenomenal. Because when it's just kind of ambiguous, people have all different ideas of how it should look. But if it's exactly like this, and you do every variation of every screen, then it's much clearer when you're coding together what needs to happen. So I highly recommend that. So the principle here is be pixel perfect. So now, step 7 is not really a step, but it's here to remind you that you need that you don't just kind of go all through all this in one quick shot. This is kind of a iterative process. And so at various stages, you'll do a stage, and things won't have worked out, and the screen won't, it's just not working, and you need to start over again. Sometimes you have to go back to some previous steps and start back and stuff. So here's one screen that I was working on just a couple of days ago. I had this idea of I thought, well, I want to do this signpost interface. And so I did this one. I liked it. I came back, look at it a few minutes later. I hated it. So I did another version. And I spent 6 hours going about different versions. And it finally ended with something I kind of liked. So I kind of iterated just on this one screen. And at this same project, at one point, we actually were building this entire, the original idea for the project was had a phone plus a website. And everything else was completely up to the object link stage. It was all completely laid out and pixel perfect. And we actually thought we had it down right. And then we started implementing it, and we realized, in our early tests, that no one actually used the website at all. It just was complete, people said they would, but they didn't actually really. And so we had to go back to the sketching stage again and start sketching over again and reimagine the application. So the principle here is nothing is precious. If you just kind of, it's hard to get sort of distance yourself from your work, but if you can gain that ability of okay, it's okay to throw it away, it's okay to start again. The more you're comfortable with this, actually, the faster you'll get an app out the door than if you're trying to hold on to things as long as you can until they completely break in beta testing and users or you release it and users give you horrible reviews in the App Store and no one buys your app. So.
Which of those designs work best on the previous?
I'm sorry, which one?
Which of those designs on the previous prototypes?
Which one of these?
Yeah, which one?
Oh, did I pick with? So currently, it's the lower right-hand corner. This is the progression. I actually, in the few days since I've left this, I've kind of begun to doubt the design, so I think I'm going to go back and do another round of it. But this was actually the progression that I went, come with the different designs that they're all kind of identical to the paper. The paper version was just merely the outline of this, but this was kind of putting the look and feel on top of it. Other question?
So all of your graphics is also from OmniGraffle, or is that?
A large percentage, so for example, in this. So the question was, do all the graphics come from OmniGraffle? A lot of them do. Some of them don't. So the wood was sampled from from samples I found online, and they're not really perfect. They probably look better from back there than they do than they actually really do, because they're just grabbed offline. Because I want to get feel of different types of what wood textures would look like. So I actually often have another step after this where I will go take this and then go into Photoshop and make it really, really perfect. Although you can actually get really, it depends on the application. If you're trying to do something that has a really complex look and feel like this, then you want to do a Photoshop step afterwards to really make it exactly correct. And also, so you don't infringe on copyright by stealing someone else's wood texture from online. So you'll need to create your own version of that. But I would say that for a lot of applications that stick with a standard look and feel, which I recommend, if you have to have a pretty good reason for going, a really custom look and feel, and And because sometimes it can be like distracting and confusing to the users, and kind of like this interface, for example, limits the amount of space, the amount of text you can have on the screen. On a normal like list, you'll be able to have many more rows than you have here. It happens to be that for like the list of activities you might like perform this application, there aren't very many of them, so it's kind of OK to have a fewer displayed. But this may not be the case. So for some applications I've written, or many of them, omnigraphal is enough. Like, and if they're just using the standard controls, I don't really need to go to a sort of like additional Photoshop stage. Other questions? All right. So step 8. All right, now you can finally code. So once this is pixel perfect, you know, I mean, and for the word, I don't mean that it doesn't change. It's still going to change. But now you finally know what you're going to do at last. So now you can move forward and code. And my recommendations for coding, I don't know what this is actually a picture of, really. Like, I looked up MVC and Google image search. This was what came up. So I thought it was kind of funny, and so I put it up. But the idea here is, you know, like in this class, you know, you're learning the MVC design paradigm, and it's actually really, really useful. Also, when you're trying to do good user interface design, is to really be mindful of that design pattern, because it abstracts away your views and also your controllers, which are connected to your views, away from the underlying data and the back-end stuff. And so what it allows you to do is it allows you to code your app from the top down. Like like over many dozens and dozens of programs I've written, I have learned that far and away it's best to write the interface first and then the backend data later. Because whenever I write the backend data thinking, oh, you know, I don't want to do interface stuff right now, it's too hard, or it's just I don't really feel like it. Let me write the back. I know the backend data isn't. I need to do it anyway. Let me just write it now because it needs to get done. Inevitably, whatever I wrote for back there actually change it. Like it becomes irrelevant when the user interface changes again. You know, if I discover something else. And so I'm a big proponent of top-down development, where you build the interface. You actually can show it to people, have them play around with it. Like you have dummy data hooked up back in the back end. You know, the real database hooked up. You just have some flat files. And you can learn a lot. And then when you change the interface, you're just changing your little dummy data rather than changing all the columns in your SQL table, or even worse, like rewriting all your algorithms in your complicated back end system. So build from the top down. It'll save you pain, especially when you're beta testing. So this is where you're going to get, like, you think you've done everything perfect up to now. And if you've done a good job the earlier phases, you shouldn't actually have any major revelations here. You've already shown it to people already so many times that the beta testing should go pretty smoothly. But inevitably, something comes up. And that's why it's better to have this clearer abstraction. And what you hopefully should be getting at beta testing is minor interaction things, little things, like wording is a little bit funny that you didn't realize before, or largely just bugs. But actually a bigger challenge when you are beta testing is who should be your beta testers. And so my first recommendation is your friends, because they're gullible and they will, and you can they're nearby and you can make them sit down and give you their UDID number from their phone and then provision it for their phone right then and there, and you can get it on there. And so definitely, even if your friends aren't your target user group, have them use your app, because you're guaranteed to get some feedback from them. But if you have an app which it's hard to get lots of local users, I had a couple of apps like this. I did an earthquake analysis app, like a seismic app for seismologists, and there was one seismologist on the campus, and there's none of them for hundreds of miles away. And so for that we had to go find other means, because regular users didn't have enough domain knowledge to really know if it actually was good or bad of an interface. If they didn't even know how to use it. And so a great resource for this, less for seismologists, but more for other user groups, if you're doing this app for mothers and you're on campus, and there are a lot of mothers on campus or something, is to use Mechanical Turk. And if people are familiar with Mechanical Turk, some people. Okay, so for those of you who aren't, Amazon Mechanical Turk is a service where people who are online who have nothing better to do with their time, and there are tens and thousands of these people, or hundreds of thousands of these people, it's amazing, go on this website, and for small amounts of money, often 5 or 30 cents, or sometimes just a few dollars, they will perform some task. And so often, often these tasks are classify this image as one of these 3 things, or so people use it for research projects all the time. I use it all the time for every project I do. I'm addicted to Mechanical Turk right now. But it's actually a great tool for recruiting beta testers if you're looking for ones that are kind of not immediately available to you. And you can put on, hey, like if for people who have iPhone 3Gs and who are mothers and blah, blah, you sign up for this app and we'll pay you $1 or $2 to use our app for 15 minutes, And if you just need a small sampling, like 5 or 10 users, you can for ridiculously little amounts of money compared to normal testing, you can actually get users, and it's really responsive. People usually do, you put the task up, and people are on Mechanical Turk because they're bored looking for a task, and they'll do it right away. You get this wonderful, really fast responses. And it's a little bit annoying because you have to actually provision your app for that person's UDID, so there's a little bit of turnaround time. But I've had nothing but really good experiences with this. And we've had and you do it, and an advantage is also, if these are your real users, a lot of times they ask you, can I keep using this app after the 10 minutes is done? And you say, sure. And they keep testing it for you for free for a longer period of time because they want to use the app, So you get this, it's this wonderful mechanism for recruiting people. And so I recommend it. Question? OK, so the question was, how do you actually give other users your application? And the process, so I don't know if you'll cover it in this class. You might towards the end, but you're not going to cover it? OK. So the process is called ad hoc distribution. And basically what happens is that they will give you their UDID. It comes from, they can either get it out of iTunes, or they can install this little app that'll email the UDID to someone else. It's called Ad Hoc Helper. It's really awesome. And you tell them to hey, download Ad Hoc Helper and send your UDID to this address, and they do that. And then what you do is you go onto your developer program portal account. They have accounts on the developer portal? No. OK.
In the university program.
OK. So since you're on the university program, you might not be able to do beta testing. Presumably, if you're in this class because you want to do this more than just for this class, so then you get a real developer account. You can probably you'll be able to do this. But basically, you go on the website. You enter their UDID, and then it downloads a little file, which you install in Xcode, which signs the program for that user's phone. So you have a list of exactly which phones they can be installed on, and every time a new person signs up, you have to go to the website, download this file again, add it in Xcode, and then you build your program, and then you find the actual file on disk, the .app file for it, and then you mail it to them in the email, and they drag it into iTunes, and iTunes will install it. It's a little bit cumbersome, but people are generally willing to are generally willing to actually go through the hassle of doing it, especially if you target people who actually really want the kind of application that you're trying to get them to use. So, other questions about that? Answer your question about that? Cool. So yeah, so the principle here: test before you submit, catch those small things, because remember, you get to be on the new apps page once, and if it go on there and has some horrible bug, and people give you some obscure weird bug, which happens if I don't know because they live in Europe and you didn't account for time zone differences or something like that, and you didn't think of it because you were testing only here or whatnot, then you make a bunch of horrible reviews, and your app is sunk, and it's hard to kind of pull out of that. So definitely do ad hoc testing before you actually release your application, and then release. And this should be the hooray happy party, although actually it's not quite like that. It's going to be actually worse for a week, because you're going to be responding to people that have issues with your application, and you don't want to refund them quickly so they don't write bad reviews for you on the App Store. So it's not always quite as happy as this, but at least you're done with the first version. And of course, you're going to iterate. You're probably going to iterate and do bug fixes and release a new version. But in general, it's kind of like this anyway. So I'm not going to cover too much more about the release and maintenance and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of a different topic. But that's kind of the general flow of this entire process. And so kind of the final key points I just want to reiterate again, just in case, is make sure you talk to users. It's too easy as computer scientists, myself included, to just not want to deal with that. Just write your code and stuff and think that you know what people want, and you don't, no matter how good you are. The best designers at Apple still don't completely know, and they still have to talk to other people. Explore a lot of designs. It'll take a small amount of your time, and you're going to get a potentially much larger investment than you'd get by just spending a little bit more time coding and making things a little bit faster. And iterate. Nothing's precious. Keep iterating on your designs. So that's the presentation. Does anyone have questions? So the checkbox is actually replaced by the slider control. So it's back here in a second. So this control right here is the checkbox, this on-off slider. And so the idea is the iPhone focuses on sort of on more physical metaphors. So like checkboxes aren't. It's not really clear how you check a box with your finger, but you could slide. So the idea is that's why they chose the slider instead.
But you're talking about the step 2 one, the item 2.
Yeah, the item 2. So
that's like a toggle. That's a radio button, more like a radio button as opposed to a checkbox.
Not necessarily. So the question was, is this really like a checkbox, or is this actually like a radio button? And there are only two, like a checkbox, there are only 2 states can be in, on or off. Radio buttons allow you to have multiple states. So the option for a radio button, often what you'll have is like a table view that supports checks, right? So you can, from multiple options, you can click one of them and it will check that option. So that's the sort of the radio button alternative, and this is the checkbox alternative for the phone. So the question is there any way to change the text on that? I think you might be able to change it to yes, no. I don't know if you can change it to any arbitrary text string. I've actually not. You can change it to any text?
Any arbitrary.
OK, so all right, cool. So yeah, you can hit any text. That's good to know. I've never actually needed to do that in any application I've done. OK, so the question is, what about these checkboxes over here? So on the web, so when you're in Safari on the web, it uses the traditional controls, including checkboxes and things. This is for reasons of dimensions. So putting an enormous slider where the designer of the page has only allotted enough space for a little checkbox may completely screw up their design. So in that case, Apple does use traditional checkboxes and traditional radio buttons. It's kind of the suboptimal case, but it's the only case in the interface where you're not even allowed to use those in Interface Builder for the regular interface. So I've actually not submitted any apps. The question is, how many apps have I actually submitted to the App Store? I have not submitted any personally. I know people who have, and I work with them. And I finished up apps internally at Apple, which has a little different process. So I'm familiar with the process, but I've actually not submitted them. Although I am submitting one in a few weeks. So I'll be going through it then. Yeah. So the question is the hard part drawing? There's a certain degree where so I would say there's a very different skill set between drawing to create art and drawing to just figure out what the layout should be. I, for example, am much better at just laying things out, like taking these and moving them around on a screen than I am at creating actual art. I need help from other people for that, or I just think it takes me a really long time in Photoshop to do that. And there's many apps in the App Store for which there's really the only original art is maybe the icon. And all the rest is just pretty much choosing these. And there's some wonderful apps that I like as I mentioned Birdhouse earlier. It's this great app. There's nothing really no fancy graphics or things like that. It's just a matter of using these existing controls. And so for doing that, you don't have to be an artist to sketch that out. It doesn't matter how horrible your sketches are. Like mine, no one else would hardly understand. I have to either explain them to people because they're so incomprehensible, which is OK at the sketching stage. At paper prototyping, you have to be a little more neat. It takes a little bit more time to do that. But I would never say you have to be an artist to actually develop iPhone apps. OK, so the question is what about implementing your ideas, that you're realizing your ideas? Do you mean in terms of coding or in terms of
you can't actually get there. You can't. You're struggling to actually realize your design ideas. OK,
so what if it is you design an application, I can't actually code it? So it's one of those situations where you have to, there's a few options. One thing is, well, maybe you picked up too broad of a task, or your task is just too much for you to code in the time. And you can almost always take a smaller slice of what you've done. Now, maybe it's a little less relevant to all users, but you can take a smaller slice. If it's like you're trying to do some complicated AI thing with it, well, it can't really help you there. You can recruit someone from the AI department, or maybe you can write a different application. If that requires something like that, then you may have to pick a suboptimal design, but one is within your constraints. Because you're always going to have constraints, right? You might write this great application, but it requires your iPhone to be 3 times as big as it is. Well, there's nothing that's really going to happen there. So you have to keep these constraints in mind. And I think that I personally don't think that there's really anything that is so hard to code on the iPhone that you couldn't figure it out with a little bit of time and effort. There's nothing that's you're not going to be writing compression algorithms and stuff. Almost anything you want to do, it's either been done already, you can download a library for some complicated algorithms, or you could probably figure it out with enough time. So question, are there any open source code repositories for like table views and things? I know GitHub has some stuff. I don't know if it has just like regular course of snippets on it. There's some open source applications. Google Code. I mean, yeah, like coders. There's a number of just search engines, which some of them have iPhone code on them now. I don't know of anything specific to the iPhone for that task. Other questions? All right. Well, I think we're out of time, but all right. Thank you so much.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.